Hello classmates, my name is Virginia Randolph and the focus of my paper is going to be on the hardships associated with immigration to the United States. I have selected 4 sources that really focus on and bring out the topics that we have learned in our class. I've selected Seymour Reitzik, who was a very successful child performer in Poland before the war. After the war, his family found the need to leave their country, to escape, and came to the United States. And during that time, they endured a very tumultuous trip. Young Seymour became very ill on the trip, and there was concern that he would not be able to enter the country because of the restrictions against those who were ill. But he got well, and after 2 weeks they were permitted to enter the country. Isabel Belarsky was a Stalin-era Russian Jew whose family needed to escape Europe after the war for their own safety. They came to the United States via a boat. They came into the New York harbor and discovered that the uncle who was to put up the $500 bond in order to gain their entrance did not show up. They were forced to spend the evening at Ellis Island. They were put into a room that had 40 cots but no sheets. They were each given a cup of soup as a meal, and they were permitted just 10 minutes of time to enjoy the fresh air. They were in fear that they would be sent back to Russia, but fortunately once they got to the magistrate and he heard their case and they passed their medical examination, they were permitted to enter the country as well. John Doyle was an Irishman who came to the United States to meet up with his family, and in the hopes of earning enough money to be able to send for the family that had been left behind in Ireland. He endured a great deal of challenges, starting with arriving to learn that his father, rather than being proud that his son had endured the travels and was able to come to the United States, rather used him as a trophy. This distressed John greatly, so he left Pennsylvania, where his father was, went to New York, where he took on work as a map salesman. As a map salesman, he was very successful, he did very well, but the employer cheated him out of his money. And since he was an immigrant and there was no justice available to him, he decided that he was going to go into business for himself, and he spent all the money that he had saved to purchase photographs that he sold to the tourists. This was very successful financially, but he was very distraught, missing his family, having no one here in the United States to comfort him and console him, and he was very disappointed in how immigrants in particular were treated. And he lamented that if he had known that it was going to take 6 months or more in order to be welcomed and be part of society here in America, he might never have left Ireland. And he actually recommended that people be told that it would take that long, maybe to dissuade them from coming. The final source that I'm using is my own grandfather, who came as a young man with his family as a Mexican immigrant. He was initially 10 years old when he came to this country. At 17, he registered for his green card, and he made quite a life for himself, although it was very challenging. He was very poor, he was a farmer, he was literate enough to read and write some, he spoke some English, but his opportunities were very limited. He raised a family of 12 children and never became a United States citizen. He got his green card at 17, and he felt that one day he would indeed return back to his homeland. An interesting note for him, he came in 1916, so he was prior to the Braceto program, but he was involved in it. Because he worked agricultural and because he worked at a ranch, he was the driver who would go and pick up the Bracetos, bring them to the farm, help them to get settled in for the day's work, take them back to where they would go in the evenings, take them to town when they got paid so that they could cash their check. And it was actually quite interesting that despite his coming over as an immigrant as a young child, he was actually actively involved in the program that brought a lot of Mexican labor into Arizona in particular. In this class, I have to say that I've had quite mixed emotions. Learning that my grandfather was part of the Braceto program was very heartening. It made me proud to know that he was part of that program. But it's also been discouraging, the way that we have treated immigrants from the beginning, despite being a nation built on immigrants. The fact that we are always looking for someone to alienate, someone to not allow into the country simply because they look different or they speak different or because their culture is different. And the fact that that nativist attitude continues even into our own day. Certainly there is a need to monitor immigration, to ensure the safety of our shores, the safety of our people, but we have to have a humanitarian component to that as well. And rather than enforcing strict quotas strictly on who is the best example of what it is to be an American, or in other words, to be a white male, perhaps we ought to look at what's best for humanity as a whole and allow them to have the same opportunities that those initial immigrants had. I would argue that it's not a group of people specifically that causes fear and trepidation, but it's the fear and trepidation that is promoted that causes us to fear letting someone else come in. So overall, I've really enjoyed the course, but it has definitely changed my opinion and my feelings about immigration in America.